Hi, I'm Susie Gitzeg, Marketing Director and a passionate leader of empathetic, high-performance teams. Welcome to my LinkedIn video series, Leading Questions, where I dive into real conversations with authentic leaders. So today, my guest is Varun Chhabra. He's the SVP of ISG and Telecom Marketing. He's also one of my previous bosses, and really excited to have him join me today on LinkedIn Live.
Thanks for having us, Susie.
We're going to start back at the beginning. So really interested for you to share any experience you had that shaped your leadership journey, maybe something helped you decide you wanted to become a leader.
Yeah, I have two stories at kind of different stages in my life. First one, I was listening to your conversation with Courtney Hughes, and very similar stories. First leadership experience for me that I remember was sports. So, in school, I grew up in India. Cricket is huge in India, as you probably know. I was chosen to be the captain of one of our teams in the school. And while I had some experience with being, smaller experiences and being having leadership duties in a classroom, etc., I never really been the captain of a sports team, and there's a different level of pressure that comes with that. Um,
Yes.
it was a very eye-opening experience for me. It must have been eighth grade, but I still remember to this day how uncomfortable it made me, and how you don't really, as a leader, don't really understand until you're in the arena the stress about, like, oh, what are people thinking? Am I making the right decision? I have to carry the burden of the team and help the team, and the decisions I make are actually going to impact more than me. So it was an interesting experience to go through it. I remember I had to make a difficult decision where we had a rock star player who was like clearly the best player on the team. He didn't show up to practice. I
Uh-oh.
decided not to put him in one of our games, and he got really, really upset. And he created a big drama before this thing. Clearly didn't respect me as a leader, but it was a
Yeah.
just experience to go through that. And I still remember those experiences when you give into certain things, the whole trade-off of giving into something, that creating a bad experience later on, or you stand your ground and you build respect, was one thing. The other thing that happened to me was, like, somehow in that tournament that we played, we actually won the tournament. I personally played really, really badly. I didn't have a great tournament myself, but kind of being captain and guiding the team through that, despite not being able to contribute myself the way I would want to in an individual capacity, was an interesting experience. I think about that a lot because leadership is really about service to others and doing things for a greater reason. It's not really about what you're getting out of it and what your personal ambition is. At the end of the day, it's about what you're doing for a greater cause, and the goals that you're looking to get to as a group. And that's kind of where the greatest fulfillment comes.
It's
That was
pretty
one.
amazing. You saw that as an eighth grader, you were making the decisions that were difficult as an eighth grader. A lot of folks in a leadership position in some of these early sports, they just go with the flow, and you were making calculated, thoughtful decisions about how you wanted to present
Yeah.
as a leader, even in that role. So want to
It
call
was
that
it
out.
was I guess I haven't thought about it like that. It was pretty tough, though. I think part of leadership is really about understanding what a likely reaction is going to be given the person's desires, etc. So anyway, that was one. The second experience was a lot later. I mean, later in my professional career, I must have been. I think I just finished business school. I must have been maybe 20, 28 or so. And I was working at Microsoft, and I moved to another team within Microsoft, and I took on a lot more responsibility, and I got a chance to work with a pretty senior leader, a general manager at Microsoft. And she was an unbelievable leader, just an unbelievable leader. She wasn't my direct boss. She was I think my
Mhm.
skip level, or skip level actually, when I joined. But she, to me, really opened my eyes to the potential of leadership in a corporate setting, how you can actually inspire people by giving them confidence. She helped me understand what my strengths were. Like, a lot of leaders, they spend a lot of time talking about what you're not doing well, et cetera, et cetera. She would spend a lot more time celebrating what I did well and giving me a sense of, like, oh, you bring these things in. And, it was kind of, Susie, it was kind of magical what it did for me. It was just magical what it did for my confidence, and what it really showed me what a leader can do, and the difference a leader can make in somebody's performance and how they see themselves. So that experience is something I take with me and try to embody. I'm just a huge fan of leaders like that.
You know what I would say as someone who's been on your team, and I know I brought this up when we were chatting briefly before, I didn't realize sometimes that men could lead like that. I know I told you when I moved into your team, you'd been the first male leader I had at Dell. I'd had about
Mm.
8 or 9 years of female leaders. And I remember having a conversation with some friends saying, like, I just don't know. I'm moving into this, organization that's predominantly male leadership. What's it going to be like? Are we going to still talk about feelings a little bit? Like, does anyone care how we're feeling? And one thing I got from you really early on was that you did care. You're tough, but you also did care about all of us as people. And it's interesting hearing like that's what you got from the leader that you got to work with.
Yeah.
And it's clear that that ended up as a part of your style and how you bring this to your day to day, regardless of what team you're leading, that people do feel like individuals that you do actively care about how they're being on your teams.
I mean, and Susie, you're one of those people that you learn something from everybody that you work with, not just your leaders. You learn leadership skills. What I wanted to say is from everybody, and I think we're talking about empathy here. I feel like you embody that really, really well. Like you really care, really, really care about your team members, and those tough decisions they personally impact you. Of course, you make them because you have to. Just like you were talking about our experience together. I mean, I learned a lot about how much you care about your team members and just how you thought about these difficult decisions and the various factors you pulled in was pretty inspirational for me as well.
Well, thank you, Varun. Let's talk a little more about empathy. So I know we both count ourselves as empathetic leaders and servant leaders. I'm interested in like how empathy shows up in behaviors. What does empathy look like in your day-to-day leading your teams or in your role?
Yeah. I'll start by saying this, Susie. As leaders, all of us have things that come naturally to us because of who we are and our experiences, and things that we've got to work on, right? For me, empathy is something that's just how I was raised, and how my parents raised me, and the experiences I had. It comes somewhat naturally to me. While I've obviously had to work at certain things, right from the start, the basics for me are kind of just who I am. I think the first thing is you've got to get to know people that work in your organization on a personal level. So taking the time to understanding what their life is like outside of work, what are things they like to do, what drives them at work, what are their ambitions. Trying to move beyond the transactional, I think, is important. And sometimes it's hard. I don't think I'm perfect at that. Sometimes you get caught up in work and you have a series of one-on-ones with people where you're just talking about work, 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 work. But as much as possible, I like to make sure that the at least the first few minutes when you chat with somebody, you're talking a little bit about things beyond work, because ultimately things that connect us are often things that are happening outside of work. I mean, you talked about this in your conversation with Courtney as well. It could be struggles with being parents, or something humorous about your married life, or experiences you've had while traveling, etc. Those things are really, really important. I like to prioritize when I'm being conscious about my role as a leader, and I'm not in the weeds, and I'm being thoughtful about it. In my best moments as a leader, I make sure I spend time talking about those things. And then when there are difficult decisions and difficult things to communicate, for me, it's very important to acknowledge how those things are hard, right? Like, maybe someone was looking for a promotion and they didn't get it. You obviously have to give them the feedback on what they need to do differently or what still needs to be done to get a promotion. But at the same time, you also have to acknowledge how hard that message is for the person to hear. When I'm my best self as a leader, trying to do that, I think is very important. I try to make a lot of effort to spend time with people just after meetings, sitting and talking to people. I get a lot from it. It's just great for me as a people person to kind of get to know the people you work with and build that connection. When you're not talking about work, you could be at an event and evening time, you're having dinner with your team. Small moments like that, you gotta take advantage of those. Some of the best advice I've ever received as a leader and as someone who wants to be an empathetic leader is people always remember how you make them feel. You could stop working with people and not work with people because your role changes or they move on or you move on, but people always remember the connection, and they always remember how you made them feel. Obviously, as leaders, we've had to make tough decisions. We have to make decisions that affect people's careers and affect their livelihood. If you think about the hardest conversations there are in your professional life, and even in that situation, like, I've taken that advice to heart. It's a tough conversation. You can be empathetic and you can show people that you understand that it's hard for them. um, because of that, I've managed to have relationships with people who have had to deliver difficult news
Wow.
to, right? But I'm still in touch with now. It's also about, keeping a focus on how you make people feel. And I always think about, there are leaders that I admire, and you're certainly one of those people who, looking at feedback, 360 feedback that we've got, about you from your team members, you always say, oh, this person's team will run through walls for them, right? You're certainly one of those people. I think that for a lot of people for whom people say those things, it's because they're actually building those connections, and it's about how the leaders make them feel about themselves, both in their best moments and in their toughest moments as well.
I know we talked a little bit about in the beginning that it's both a good thing and sometimes a hard thing to genuinely care so much, which I've thought a lot about. I think you told me that advice a few months ago, and I've thought about that a lot. But I think I'd always rather index on the caring, even if it comes with some of the difficult decisions.
If these decisions don't affect you on a personal level, then I think you're not in the leadership game for the right reasons.
I agree.
Anyway.
All the conversations that I'm having, not surprisingly, are with people that I see as servant leaders. Everyone isn't a servant leader. It's not the only way to lead, but to me personally, it's the way to lead that I feel like is the right setup for the next generation. It's what we want personally as individuals. We want leaders that see us and care about us, even when things are difficult. And yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely worth talking about.
Just to clarify one point here, I mean, it's not that, yes, you're right, there are many different leadership styles.
Mm-hmm.
But even for people who don't think of themselves as servant leaders or subscribe to that philosophy, can be, of course, very effective leaders and will get impacted by these tough decisions, right? Some people may be less empathetic than others, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't impact them. So I think what I was trying to say is, like, no matter what your leadership style is, wherever you index on empathy, if these decisions don't impact you, you're not in it for the right reasons, in my opinion.
Let me ask you, do you find that these behaviors, as you've moved up in your career, are easier or harder to utilize? I know it's part of who you are, but has there ever been a situation where you're like, I don't know, can I show up in this way with my team or in these tough decisions?
Yeah. I wouldn't put it on the spectrum of easy or hard. It's a different dynamic. As leaders, we all look ourselves at the mirror every so often and think about, like, hey, in this situation, what am I going to do? What am I comfortable doing? What am I not comfortable doing? I think certain things are new experiences when you have large organizations, and you don't have as many forums to build, person to person connection. I think for empathetic leaders, it can be hard. I'm assuming it's the same for you. I draw a lot of confidence and security as a leader from the knowledge that I know, person XYZ on my team, and I think I have a sense of what they're thinking. When you are learning to lead larger organizations, it's not possible to do that, right? You can't get to know everybody as well as you'd like, and you have to learn to kind of just be comfortable with that, because you may be talking to organizations and putting yourself out there, sharing experiences, sharing your feelings, being vulnerable in front of people that you don't necessarily know as well as you'd like, right? So I think that part is an adjustment. But at the same time, there are some privileges that come with that as well. As you rise through your career, there is just an intrinsic confidence you have. There's inevitably that feedback loop that you get from your employer and your manager as you kind of grow in your career, that how you show up to work and what you embody as a leader is working, right? So it's a bit of a balance, right? So you do have that sense of intrinsic confidence that, hey, this is how I show up. This has worked for me in the past, and I feel like this is who I want to be as a leader. I'm just going to do what I do. Not knowing people as well, and not understanding every person in your organization is harder, if you will. But it balances itself out.
That's a very good way to put it. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way, but I think I will now. So, as there are easy times and tough times, how do you take care of yourself? How do you balance stress, emotional challenges, things that might show up in your path?
Everybody has things outside of work that kind of recharge them. In my best moments as a leader, I have that balance. I've taken time to read or hear a podcast or spend time with my son, and go outside and play or go for a jog and spend time with the family. Though when I'm in my best moments as a leader, those things are in balance. And whenever those things are not in balance, I am usually not my best self as a leader.
It's understanding yourself as a leader, understanding how you work, knowing when you're on your game and you're being your best self, or when you're off your game and you need to recalibrate and lean into those behaviors.
I must have told you this as well. One of the things I like to say is that the only thing that keeps me up at night, at least work related, are how are the people in the organization doing? Are people happy? Are they inspired? Are our top performers gonna, are we investing in them? I know it sounds a little trite, but it really is true. I've never been the kind of person that's lost sleep about the work, right? So it's really the things that are tough decisions. The way I approach the stress that comes from those things is, if you think about all the things that could go wrong and how people are going to feel and what that's going to do, it can be paralyzing. I think especially for people like you and me who index more on the empathetic side, rather than try to take all of those things on and force yourself to make a decision in certain situations that are stressful or challenging, and you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to force myself to just think about what my instinct says and what I would do in this situation, what my decision is going to be. Like, I'm going to try to explore some of these things, and you explore those decisions, and you say, what if I did this versus this, and what's the right thing for the organization. For me, I feel a lot better if I've kind of let it simmer. I've not put pressure on myself that I have to make a decision. It's more just like, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable, you've got to think through it. And then I talk to people. I talk to people a lot, actually. I've always been fortunate enough to have people who I lead, who I trust, and can talk to. I've done that with you many times. I just think out aloud and I say, hey, what if we were to do this? I've learned that I think that makes people uncomfortable sometimes. People have an impression of leadership that it's like coming on from high, the decision's made, here's what I'm going to do, I'm a rock. There's some confidence that people get out of their leader making those kind of decisions. But I'm not one of those people. I need to talk about those things with certain people that I trust. So it could be, you know, I'm lucky enough for the last few years to have a manager that I have an unbelievable relationship with, and I talk with him a lot about these things. So, here's what I'm thinking, and he's a great sounding board. I talk to my wife. She's not from the tech world. She's in the nonprofit world. She thinks very differently from me. She's always got great feedback and advice. So for me, the process is like, really, you talk it out, you think out loud, you kind of hear yourself talk out loud. Sometimes that for me helps. I'm one of those people that likely like you thinks with emotion many times, especially when it comes to people things. So I think sometimes it's good to have people who at least for me, are a little bit more strategic in their thought. They're thinking more about, not just the people things, but like, hey, what about the work situation? Here's something from my perspective. So just bringing in that diversity of thought, I think, is important. The biggest advice I have is, you want to approach these decisions and you want to give them the respect that they deserve, because they're tough decisions. You want to give yourself time to kind of simmer in the discomfort, and over time, at least for me, as you have these conversations and as you get comfortable with the discomfort, the right solution usually emerges.
If there's any final advice you'd give to someone who might be considering a career in leadership, what would you say to them?
I would just say, spend some time thinking about why you want to do it, what kind of leader you want to be. I just keep going back to what I said at the start. It's like, people remember how you make them feel. Like, as much as they'll remember, like, whether you got them promoted, those things over time, I think, fade compared to, like, is this person advocating for me, and how did this person make me feel as both a human, as a person outside of work, and as well as a professional.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Varun, for your advice and talking about your journey.
Thank you for doing this series. It's an amazing series. I get so much out of it as well. So thank you. Thank you for doing this, and thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. And for everyone else, please tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of Leading Questions.